Counterterrorism is often cited as an important potential opportunity for collaboration between the United States and Russia. Both Russia and the United States have been targeted by radical Islamist organizations in the past, and similarly, both countries have diverted considerable public resources towards fighting terrorism. Despite this, cooperative counterterrorism efforts between Moscow and Washington have not materialized. Moreover, Russia's counterterrorism efforts have seen very mixed results, despite the Kremlin's frequent tributes to its security forces. So what explains Russia's counterterrorism policy? What are the obstacles to its collaboration with the United States and other Western countries and institutions? This video will offer an overview of Russia's counterterrorism measures. It will highlight possible answers to these questions as well.
Russia's counterterrorism policy has been shaped by its experience fighting a protracted insurgency in the North Caucasus. In the early 1990s, this insurgency was explicitly nationalist in character. Chechen separatists fought for their republic's independence from Russia. By 1999, when Moscow launched a new decade-long counterterrorism operation, the Chechen campaign had evolved into a region-wide Islamist insurgency. Terrorist violence began spilling over into Russian cities and regions beyond the North Caucasus. In 2007, these scattered Islamist groups were united under the umbrella of the Caucasus Emirate, a terrorist group that sought to establish a Sharia-based Islamic state within Russia's North Caucasus. To limit the actions of terrorist groups and individuals associated with terrorist organizations, Russian authorities have prioritized the use of repression and force. Both were deployed heavily in the North Caucasus, where counterterrorism measures ranged from mop-up operations and targeted killings of Islamist leaders to the arrest of family members of individuals purportedly linked to terrorist activity. The Russian military, assisted by Secret Service task teams, showed little restraint, resulting in considerable civilian casualties and human rights violations. Yet the Russian government has always understood that force alone isn't enough to defeat terrorism. As a result, it has also deployed administrative and limited socioeconomic counterterrorism measures. In Chechnya, for example, the Kremlin appointed Akhmad Kadyrov, a leading Chechen elite, as the republic's leader, and used divisions among the Chechen elites to weaken local resistance. The Kremlin bought the loyalty of the Kadyrov clan by offering it protection and considerable financial resources to keep order and reconstruct the small republic. Although this strategy entailed the transfer of counterterrorism responsibilities from Russian to Chechen hands, it entrenched the power of abusive local elites and reshaped the conflict into an internal dispute between rival factions. It also laid the foundations for the Kremlin's current dependency on local rulers, who promised stability in their republics in exchange for immunity from prosecution and federal support. Billions of dollars invested into the various socioeconomic and infrastructure projects in the North Caucasus have been lost due to local corruption. In 2014, several high-ranking field commanders from the Caucasus Emirate pledged oaths of allegiance to the Islamic State. Russia's Federal Security Service launched an extensive terrorist leadership decapitation campaign designed to prevent a terrorist attack during the Winter Olympic Games organized in Sochi. Around this time, Russia's Secret Service was implicated in an unprecedented campaign encouraging Russian militants to travel to Iraq and Syria in order to reduce the risk of Islamist attacks at home. Although Russia's counterterrorism strategy fractured the Caucasus Emirate, multiple autonomous jihadist cells popped up in other Russian regions, including the Volga, the Urals, and Siberia. The global and regional dimensions of Russia's counterterrorism policy developed concurrently with Moscow's domestic counterterrorism efforts. In the mid-1990s, the Russian government claimed that there were operational ties between Chechen fighters and Al-Qaeda. In the early 2000s, when the Second Chechen War was underway, the Kremlin insisted that hundreds of Chechen fighters, including several dozen Islamic extremists connected to the Al-Qaeda network, were hiding in the tumultuous Pankizi Gorge area in Georgia, near the border of the Chechen Republic. Moscow also warned of the growing threat of terrorism from Afghanistan and sought to strengthen Central Asia's security infrastructure. In addition, it sought to portray its counterterrorism operation in the North Caucasus as part of the global war against terrorism and advocated for a joint Euro-Atlantic counterterrorism effort. The establishment of ISIS elevated the threat of transnational terrorism for Russia. By 2016, an estimated 3,417 Russian foreign fighters had left for Iraq and Syria. Multiple jihadist cells, radicalized by online ISIS propaganda, popped up in different parts of Russia. Using the pretext of combating the terrorist threat in Syria, the Kremlin launched a military intervention in the Syrian civil war in September 2015. Similar to its domestic counterterrorism policy, Russia's regional and global counterterrorism efforts have predominantly relied on military tactics. In Central Asia, Moscow strengthened the military components of the Collective Security Treaty Organization and Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Joint counterterrorism operations and security drills have become a regular feature of counterterrorism initiatives between Russia and Central Asia. In Syria, Russia's troops focused on the physical liquidation of insurgents and efforts to provide air support for Syrian military operations. In addition to influencing the counterterrorism strategies of its neighbors, Russia has sought to shape international counterterrorism efforts through its United Nations initiatives. As a permanent member of the UN Security Council, it has advocated for this UN agency to be used as the primary venue for discussing all counterterrorism questions, to the exclusion of civil society actors. It supported the establishment of the United Nations Office of Counterterrorism and lobbied for a Russian diplomat's appointment as the organization's head. Most of Russia's counterterrorism efforts in the UN have concentrated on developing member states' capacity to suppress terrorist attacks and curb the flow of foreign fighters. It has blocked the development of measures for countering violent extremism, or CVE, endorsed by European countries and the United States. According to the Russian government, the CVE efforts threaten to erode the traditional tasks of counterterrorism and open opportunities for Western countries to interfere in the internal affairs of sovereign states. Russian leadership has channeled considerable resources into building its counterterrorism capacity and has invested lavishly in regional security cooperation. These efforts, however, have not abated the threat of terrorism. On the contrary, the risks of homegrown and international terrorism in Russia have become increasingly challenging and complex. Some experts contend that internationally, Russia has done more to encourage terrorism than fight it. This claim stems from the Kremlin's support for separatist fighters in eastern Ukraine and its purported ties to terrorist groups such as Hezbollah and the Taliban. The ineffectiveness of Russia's counterterrorism measures can be attributed to Moscow's military excesses and its unwillingness to address the root causes of terrorism. In the North Caucasus, Russia's simplistic, military bureaucratic solutions transformed localized struggles into a region-wide religious war. In Central Asia, Russia's counterterrorism initiatives designed to prevent the spillover of Islamist insurgency from Afghanistan have diverted attention from rampant corruption, religious prosecution, lack of professional opportunities, and disastrous economic conditions. Moscow's willingness to back institutions and practices responsible for socio-political instability is clearly evidenced in Syria, where Moscow has openly supported the repressive regime of Bashar al-Assad. The Russian government has also instrumentalized counterterrorism in order to achieve various auxiliary benefits for the ruling administration. Domestically, Vladimir Putin has built his legitimacy and mandate of power on claims of stability and security for the Russian population. In Central Asia, Moscow has used a counterterrorism banner for reasserting its regional domination. Internationally, high-profile counterterrorism efforts have helped Russia to establish itself as a prominent global player capable of frustrating U.S. efforts in the Middle East. The gains made by Russia in geopolitics and counterterrorism have come at the expense of practical and sustainable outcomes in domestic, regional, and global affairs.
As this video showed, terrorism and counterterrorism tend to interact. Terrorism in Russia has been driven in part by a strong desire for retribution that resulted from abuses committed over the course of Moscow counterterrorism campaign. Only a meaningful effort at identifying and addressing the grievances that were fueled this ongoing terrorist activity, it is possible to mitigate this problem. As for cooperation between Russia and the United States, the two countries are typically fighting either different groups or the same groups, but for very different reasons. Future cooperation with Russia must be based on a careful assessment of how Moscow's counterterrorism policies might affect the United States' own security measures in the short and long term.